Okay, you ready?
I'm ready, bro. Go. Caption box, bro. Woo! Look at mine.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah. There we go. Check. All right. One more thing. Check this out.
Recorded.
Being recorded. Right. So, hey, we got all these new toys. We're back. It's been like, what, a month, 2 months, 3 months? Who knows? All I know is I'm hanging on for dear life. That's all I know. I am I'm stoked that we get to do this this chapter finally, though, right?
Oh, what a good chapter.
It's a good chapter. Wow.
I've been hanging on for 3 weeks, like
Has
waiting
it been
to do
3
it,
weeks?
champing at the bit. Forgot it, reread it, forgot it again.
Well, if we were going to get stuck like that on any particular chapter, this would be the one. Because it's just what I love. I mean, Van Pelt, man. This chapter made me a fan because he writes clearly, doesn't he?
Very clearly.
For a
And
exegetical guy.
expansively. I mean, he covered every topic that could ever be attached
Beautiful
to this issue. Yeah.
Juicy Kleinian bits all over the place. Just I knew he was a Klein guy from his interview with Chris on Glory Cloud, but just reading this, even if you've never seen that, you would know. Just very quickly, he's grabbed hold of this stuff, and it's just with a certain level of depth.
Yeah.
Obviously, knowing the kind of being at that level of Hebrew that Klein was as well, I think he's able to navigate that comfortably and confidently, and just a very clear, as you say, expansive sort of treatment of the subject, but just lucid. Just usually when you read those exegetical guys, I find they get very, very
bogged down,
atomized. Yeah, very they struggle to make it connect, and you don't want them to. You understand they're not trying to be the systematic theologian, but I mean, just to drop the bomb and not do anything with it is kind of a weird angle. So I found he hit like a really good blend of just hitting those details, but he didn't go into the systematics of it all. He didn't like break it down in terms of its implication, but he left you with such a proper sense
gave you the
of what was
exegetical
required.
basis. Yeah, definitely.
Exegetical basis, but you kind of know what you needed to do after that. You weren't.
And if
no
one knows what we're talking about the Noahic covenant of the covenant of grace.
If no one knows what we're talking about, they should leave right now. They're not welcome. We are going through our essays that we probably are going to spend the next millennia on, just looking at covenant theology and what is this book called? Have you got it in front of you there, Nick? No,
not in front of me.
Covenant Theology: Biblical, Theological, Historical Perspectives.
Yeah.
And this essay is written by Miles V. Van Pelt. He is the Hebrew guy. You probably saw him there. And he's at RTS, I think, lecturing Hebrew right now. So, but yeah, I've got his work on biblical theology, edited a bunch of essays there. Excellent. Did a great thing on Song of Solomon. So I've seen a few things pop up by him at this point. So, and it's all been stellar. So I'm very excited that he is putting out some material these days. All right. Let's take a look at the Noahic covenant. We've already established the importance of this guy, as we spoke about. What was the guy's name again?
Gary Miller? Was it Miller?
Gary Miller, yeah, I think. And apparently he's put out another follow-up talk to that. Andre said he wanted to get back to that. Okay. But yeah, so Gary Miller mentioned, we looked at his lecture at some point and used it as a bit of a springboard to show the importance of the topic. Where does Noah fit into your covenant theology, into your theology? Yep. And so we said then we'll circle back to this particular essay, and so that's what we're doing right now, and it just give you a little bit more to grip in on as you process all of this. As we've mentioned already, can't recommend the actual essay highly enough. So if I get around to putting the link, then you can just click on it. Otherwise, just Google the thing. It's easy, guys. Just Google. All right, now the Noahic covenant of the covenant of grace. That was kind of an interesting. Did you notice that title?
Yeah, I did, and I
It was
thought,
like,
yeah, it's
yeah.
well put
Mm.
because it's
So what
it's
it's saying there?
recognized. Yeah,
Yeah, go
carry
for it.
on.
No,
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 no, no.
no, no,
You do it.
no, no,
No, no, no. You
no. I
after you.
insist. I
No, no,
insist.
no. Really
All
after
right, all right. Um, well, just having struggled through this myself, when I was trying to figure out how to lay out a bit of a sort of, I don't know, a working description of covenant theology in my dissertation, I was like, where, because you could, I mean, what is the right way to say it? Do you say that the Noahic covenant is a kind of sub-administration or a subservient idea to the Pactum Salutis? I mean, because in some ways it is.
yeah,
It's really a way to create a space in history for Christ's mission,
yeah.
and then, or do you want to put it under the covenant of grace and really see it as a historical administration of that thing that God's doing with these people? So I ended up going with independently of Miles Van Pelt. I'm not sure if that's a established norm, probably is, but I ended up feeling that's a good way to frame it. The Noahic covenant is really, it's not redemptive, and you got to be clear on that, but it is ultimately connected to what's happening
Oh,
there
yeah.
with this covenant of grace, as that then becomes a sort of part of the.
It's a major turning point developing what in terms of what the covenant grace is working out.
Mhm.
Without the Noahic covenant, you've lost the stage upon
You
which
lost the
the
stage. Nope.
drama is
There we
working
go.
itself out, to quote Horton,
To
which you
quote
probably
Horton.
quoted from
I
Klein.
don't know. It's a good quote. So yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think the stage idea is fantastic because you see the
Yeah,
connection. I mean, what is the stage to the drama? Is it important? Yep. You need it. Is it the drama? If everyone just buys the ticket and watches the stage, I mean, everyone's going to be a bit disappointed. You need to see the actors on the stage, and so it's not
yeah.
the drama. And there is a legitimate distinction, but they are so tightly woven together. So, with that in mind, let me start this off by quoting just his great first opening sentence there, just straight for the
Very
jugular.
good.
The Noahic covenant recorded in Genesis 9 is a universal, unilateral, non-redemptive administration of the covenant of grace, restoring and securing the principle of common grace in this world that was suspended during the judgment ordeal of the flood.
So
Um,
much.
so much going on there, and he's going to unpack that. And basically the idea again, just showing that what we have when we talk about the covenant of common grace and the Noahic covenant, which is where it's really where it gets formally enacted. It was around before, it's around afterwards, but it gets kind of formally enacted at that point, and that's where this is what allows the elect and the non-elect to live together and
Yeah,
enjoy, as he says, the stability of a natural world order, and it will come to an end at the end of the age, at the consummation.
yeah.
So yeah, cool.
And
Any
importantly, the
mhm.
flood itself is a suspension of
Yes,
the common grace scenario. So
yes,
he's even showing why a flood judgment, and as it relates to this common grace thing that's going on.
yeah,
So yeah, just wonderful
yeah.
nuances, very, very, very deep.
Tying closely into things we've talked about before, Klein's typological intrusion idea, his
Yeah,
where you've got the kingdom intruding with its judgment and redemptive. But we will get there actually with the redemptive judgment. He does talk about that a little
yeah,
bit later on. So yeah, the suspending of all those norms is in play as you have this major global typology happening. I love the story. He doesn't go into he doesn't dramatize the whole thing, but I do love the idea. I mean, like you think about. I'm pretty sure Klein. I must have got this from Klein. I don't know where else I would have got it from, or at least the nugget of the idea. But you see. I think everyone who reads the Bible in Genesis, you see how it gets to Noah. You know, at some level, he is the minority, right? If you're not willing to say he was the only, him and his family were the only believers on the planet, then at
yeah.
least he was in the extreme minority at that point. And for any number of possible reasons, persecution, apostasy, you just got a very real scenario that I think people tend to miss.
A preacher of
Um,
righteousness for 120 years,
yeah,
as
there he
Peter
is.
maps out. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. And there he is, just going for it. I mean, my goodness, anyone thought they had it tough today? You have no idea. No, it really is the go-to for what it means to be, the only preacher guy, and just being solid in all that he's doing, and being mocked for it and so forth. But I think just getting to Noah, you kind of miss, well, Lamech, and Noah's dad. And I mean, that would have already been true with Lamech's situation. And here you have Lamech, who's in the Sethite lineage, and he's, I mean, he's holding on to Genesis 3:15. He's basically saying, when is this gonna happen? Because it's not looking good. Can you imagine being brought to test your trust in the gospel promise at that point? It's looking like you're like among the only believers on the planet,
Yeah.
literally. It's kind
Very
of like
little light.
it's
Yeah.
an end of it's a pessimistic amillennial scenario, isn't it?
Amen. Battle of Armageddon type scenario.
There it
Yeah.
is. You're expecting that sort of thing at the end, but there's Lamech, and by his naming of Noah, which means rest. I mean, you have such a vivid. For this one will bring us relief from the work of our hands.
Yeah.
Such a vivid recollection there of the curse and the promise of a Messiah, the seed of the woman. So he names his son Noah in hopes that he will be the one.
And Noah
Um,
means rest for those who didn't
no,
catch it. Yeah.
exactly. Noah means rest, and we know by the time we get to Hebrews, and of course the whole Sabbath thing, how important that is. So it really is the expression of hope in the gospel. And as we go through the story of Noah, then that sets it up really to see
Yeah.
what of course, even if you didn't know that, you've got this amazing obvious typology going on with Noah. But just
Yeah.
just the fact that this man he's not going to be the Messiah, right? Like, he's not going to be the ultimate fulfillment of Lamech's hope. He's not going to be the one who comes along later and says, for all who are weary and heavy laden, come to me and I will give you rest.
Mm.
He's not that guy, but he is rest in the sense that he's pointing to that ultimate um, reality that Christ will
Yeah, I
win.
mean, just zoning into the story, what I appreciated by Van Pelt is just maybe trying to meet out the story a little bit when he
Mm.
mentions that Noah was 500 years old and then he had three sons.
Oh man, brilliant,
So that,
brilliant
like
insight.
Abraham and Sarah, that sterility, that barrenness,
Yeah,
that out of weakness, God's strength is made whole.
yeah,
God's strength is made known.
yep,
That he may indicate a possible backstory there, which is
yep,
in keeping with all of the other events
yep.
that are very similar.
And the thing is, those backstories become front stories at other points. But it's just, and it's just great to see that they're there. They're this
Yeah,
pattern, even if they're not being majored on at that point. Doesn't mean that they weren't happening.
yeah.
There's this ongoing, just almost like this repetitive thing. Just in case we missed it the first time, there it is the second time. So it's like you almost have like no excuse by the time you get to
Yeah.
the gospel and Galatians and so forth, where you're just like, listen, this thing has been drummed in so many times. This
Yeah.
is we got a body of
Repetition is the
death.
mother of learning, and
Truly,
God is the best teacher in the world.
truly, yeah. We've got our bodies of death, and who will save us from them? And thank God, the answer is in Christ. That's the whole thing. Now, thinking about what he does, yeah, just going a little bit zooming in, I suppose, with that basic sort of story in place and getting to, because we know, I'm just going to jump over the Nephilim and all that. And,
Okay. Oh, I was hoping you'd stop on that, but
well,
yeah, there you go.
I suppose because it's a long chapter, and I'm thinking the real significance of this chapter in light of the things we've been talking
Yeah.
about is what he does with the two
Two
covenants.
covenants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen.
And so I think you have to, for whatever else we touch on, and it's all interesting and we could spend a whole episode on each thing,
Definitely.
but I
Might
don't
have to
want
come
to,
back to it.
yeah, exactly. I don't want to miss out on that. Um, so, with Noah, you've got, I think these kind of well, I suppose immediately, even with Enoch, there's this parallel going. He's being set up for something unique and big.
Yeah.
As he points out, Enoch is the only other person who is described as one who walked with God. um, and and now you have someone again. It doesn't mean he was blameless. It doesn't, but you can't help but get that feeling. There's something unique about this guy. I know Lee Irons. I remember him saying that this is. He's convinced this means it's a. Enoch is a prophet. That's the language to speak of Noah and Enoch as a prophetic figure, which I think is likely. Bruce Walker says some things as well. Walke at least says some things that seem to underscore that idea as well. But here he is. So you sort of got this tension, right? Here's this kind of almost like another Adam guy from the setup, you know.
Yeah.
He's not, he's been set up as the one who might bring in the rest. He's walking in that way. He seems like
Yeah.
he's doing that task.
And that blamelessness is typological, pointing forward to Christ's true and perfect righteousness.
Right. So I mean, like, as
Yeah.
you know, we're, you know, whether, I mean, I suppose from their perspective, they're not seeing that ultimately yet, but
Yeah.
from our side, we know, okay, there's something obviously connected there. And then he gets commissioned to design the vehicle that will bring them through the waters of judgment to the new creation. You know, this is so because of his obedience and, you know, his unique mandate from God, as it were. You know, people are brought through the catastrophe, the end, the apocalypse,
Yeah.
or I shouldn't say apocalypse because that means revelation, but you know,
The
the end,
judgment.
the
Yeah.
judgment, to bring into the as literal a new creation as you could ever imagine, before the new creation itself. And the design of the ark, as he points out, it's amazing. This again
Oh
is a
yeah, that
study
was
on
very
its own.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember looking quite a bit into this. It's really like even from as early as Josephus, they were getting into this, and it's really quite like the whole thing with the tabernacle and
Yeah.
like the whole horizontal vertical thing. I don't know if you've looked at that, where you know, you take the
Three
tabernacle,
tiers.
three
Yeah.
tiers. You got the holy, most holy, etc.
Yeah.
But
So you
you
got the
turn it.
bronze feet for the outer courts, which represents the earth, and then you got the silver feet, which represents second heaven, and then you got the gold, which represents the third heaven. And it's like the three layers. Yeah.
Yeah, you take the horizontal, you put it on vertical, and you've got this kind of three structure thing going on. So anyways, all of that's in the arc. Go see the article because that's he brings a lot of that stuff out. It's just the way that they process the cosmos then as well. Like
Yeah.
you've got the dome covering and then the water. So it's not like we would do it today. I mean, we've got perhaps the outer space kind of idea and the heavens and the skies and then the earth. But they thought about it as the, you know, the waters beneath the earth and the heavens above. So they had this three layer thing that he brings in to show how the ark is relevant for all of that.
Maybe
But
just a quick point on there.
yeah,
We must mention hydroponics because the
uh,
relevance of the waters under the earth, as one creationist guy highlights, is, you know, it's when the waters burst forth. Is that it's to prove the hydroponics theory, which is all about the tectonic plates and where the water actually came from. And it's
I thought
actually
you were
just a
talking.
yeah, it's a scientific statement according to certain views. And I just appreciated the redemptive historic, the redemptive typological sort of approach to the whole thing, dipping
Yeah,
into the cosmology as they understood it,
yeah,
not reading it through the
science.
lens of
What a
science.
classic example.
Exactly.
Wow,
Classic
wow.
example. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, you know, and you've got inspiration and inerrancy, and no one's denying that. But it's like it's just that it's not what it's going for. You
No,
know, it's
because I mean, you'll miss that richness.
yeah,
You're not putting yourself in the audience worldview. You're putting yourself in your own worldview and trying to make it answer questions it's not meant to
yeah,
answer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, all right. Now on that point, not getting caught up even on that issue, but thinking about like this is what the arc is supposed to represent now, a cosmos, you know?
Yeah.
Just do my mic there, but a cosmos. So you've got the whole cosmos represented by the ark. It becomes a microcosm of the whole thing. And you've got the man Noah who rules and reigns over the whole cosmos. Everything is in submission to him, you know, in this ark. And you know, he has been one who is obedient to God, who through this renewed sort of like little microcosm is now creating this new creation. It's a little bit of the new creation that's about to come forward, you know. And
Comes
it's
through the
just,
judgment,
I mean, isn't that amazing, just how
bringing
everything
his
is.
children with him, his
Yeah,
offspring. He shall
I
see
mean,
his offspring and rejoice.
oh, it's like you know, every just that glimmer there of what Adam was supposed to do. And this is I bring this up now because it's going to be relevant in a second, where you think about the Adamic cultural mandate and you know, what Adam was tasked to do to bring mankind into that rest. He was to have absolute dominion, right? In
Yeah.
that way. So what we see in the ark there is what Adam really should have done. He had it for a while and he lost it, and you know, he didn't ultimately do what he wasn't obedient. He didn't bring about this opportunity for entrance into Noah Sabbath rest, and so you know, he failed. But what Noah is doing there is in his absolute dominion, not through fear. The animals aren't like fearing him and cowering away, and he's not fearing the animals. It's just like this picture of actual absolute dominion that
Yeah.
that cannot otherwise be obtained.
A
So keep
little
that on
foretaste.
ice. Yeah,
Yeah.
a little foretaste, because then that must be, I think, contrasted with the refracted cultural mandate that happens when you get onto the after the flood and everything, where it's almost like the shadow fades a little bit, and now we get back to reality, and it sort of
Yeah.
sets the term for the long haul. That sets the parameters for the long haul, and you see how different that is to the picture actually. And I think that's an important idea, as it sort of uh, just makes concrete the idea of common grace versus this redemptive grace idea. But let me not jump ahead there. I think the fact that this, just before we get to the flood, the fact that the word covenant gets mentioned for the first time is important.
Yep.
It's not important in a theological sense, but it's just like, wow, okay, we've talked a lot about covenant, and here's actually where it gets said for the first time. It's kind of a jolting point in some ways, because you're like, wow, really?
Yeah.
There's so much that's happened in the
Depending
text
on your
already.
hermeneutic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So and a lot of people do go astray on that point. They're like, well, we'll start thinking about covenant theology at this stage, but up until this,
Or assume there's no changes. It's just all one and the same up because,
yeah,
yeah.
something like that. But
I think that's
just
Dumbrell
playing
or
on our
whoever he is. Yeah.
Dumbrell, exactly.
Yeah.
So playing on our previous episodes, there we're going, no, there's a lot that we've said and already established by way of covenant, and here's the first time it gets mentioned, but and that's not the ultimately significant thing about that. It's just that the way it gets mentioned is important in order to establish what kind of covenant this is, in contrast to what happens after the flood, because people talk about the Noahic covenant, and I'm not necessarily going to argue that it shouldn't be called that, but you just need more specificity. What do you mean by that? Because they're actually kind of two Noahic covenants. And are we talking about like the Noahic covenant where he represents all of creation kind of thing, or at least is the one being spoken to when all of creation is addressed, or are
Yeah.
we talking about the thing that happens prior to the flood that leads to his physical salvation and entrance into that typological new creation? What are we talking about?
Yeah.
So, we've mentioned this before. Let's go through it again, because here's where we got it from. He is the guy who's really brought it out. As he says, one way to answer the question is just to look at the nature of the covenant described in each instance. So, first, prior to the flood, in chapter 6, God makes a covenant, obviously, there with the individual Noah. And you've got all this is what could be missed, right, in the English translations, but you've got your singular pronouns going on the whole way through, so you've got to
Yep.
mark that. You've got to note that that's not plural. It's not the you all or y'all, singular. So that means that he is speaking to Noah, and that's different from what we see later on. So just that marks it down very clearly already. Thank you, Van Pelt, for highlighting the Hebrew
Hmm.
singular
Such an
pronouns.
important point.
Such an
Yeah.
important, it's a basic, study your pronouns. There it is. Second, sorry, you want to say something?
No. Just want to underline all that. So
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah, amen. Second, the covenant is uh different. You can see like the what's being spoken about. The one's talking about, I'll save you and your family and
Yeah.
get you through this flood. The other one's, I'll make sure a flood doesn't ever happen again. That's a totally
Exactly.
different thing. So we just on that alone, even if you missed the Hebrew nuance with the personal pronouns there, I mean, you can't miss that one. I find this to be like, when I hear people talk about, one redemptive covenant with Noah, and
Yeah.
they don't, I find this to be the most unforgivable thing, because like, really, have you not read the thing there? It's not
Yeah.
even talking about the same thing. You've got to just, anyone who looks at that carefully has got to at least acknowledge that point and do something with it. But I find it just gets glossed over completely in any
Yeah. And
talks.
so Joe Boot, Gary
Yeah.
Williams, all those views that are trying to push for a theonomic approach, for a social gospel approach, for
Mm-hmm.
a huge cultural engagement approach, trying to
Mm,
draw on the cultural mandate as a way of articulating the mission of the church, because as it was given to Adam, so it's just repeated for Noah, and now it's also for the church.
mm,
If you don't see these two covenants, you're going to be swept along with that way of thinking.
exactly. Um, yeah. Uh, we'll come back to something else I want to say on that one. But third, just as he points it out to you, is that I love this point as well, where you've got a very vivid distinction when God remembers Noah. this quote from Walke. Unlike English remembered, which refers merely to mental recall and entails having forgotten, the Hebrew term, especially with reference to God, signifies to act upon a previous commitment to a covenant partner. So what you have in mind with this covenant that's being made is something that has gone before, a previous covenantal commitment. And then he sort of leads out with the question, well, what covenant could that be? What do we know has happened before? And is it possible that this is a new covenantal arrangement? And he goes, well, whenever a new covenantal arrangement is made, there's always a cutting of a covenant, not a remembering of the covenant.
Yeah.
You've got to keep that in mind, that again, the words are different. And these are not mediocre ideas. These are quite vivid. So he's not, I think you can almost emphatically say this is not a new thing.
Yeah.
So he's remembering something already established, which on its own is almost like a proof of all those previous episodes that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and he makes the point that the Hebrew word frequently translated to establish should be better translated as to confirm. So every time you see that word establish, think repeating of something confirmed.
Yeah, that's good.
Confirming something already begun.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
And so here we are with the Genesis 3:15, right back in central view. So
can I just say that I really appreciated this point. He says, then to what previous covenantal arrangement does the covenant of Genesis 6 verse 18 refer? The best answer locates its antecedent in the redemptive judgment of Genesis 3 verse 14 to 19.
Yeah.
I know that some Kleinian views like to sort of start with Genesis 4. I really appreciated that it went all the way back to Genesis 3. I think this made a lot more sense to me. Yeah.
Genesis 4. Why would they?
Just in terms of if you're establishing a basis for common grace, a lot of people would look at Cain's cities and
Kleinian views would never go back to Genesis 4 on this point. They would go the after the flood one will go back to Genesis 4.
Okay. Well, there
you know what I mean? So that you've got to. That's like the thing that sets a Kleinian on fire. You want to see if you want to see a Kleinian manifest and burn immediately. So basically, this one goes back to the idea is that what is being remembered. Yeah, but the parallel dynamic is there. So after the flood, again, there'll be a kind of remembering, but what's being remembered there is not Genesis 3:15, but what comes, well, I suppose what is implicitly there in Genesis 3:15 in terms of common grace, but only what it's made more manifest.
The fact that woman continues to live to bear children, the fact that a man continues to work, the fact that there is an ongoing war between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent presupposes a common grace scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that gets made a little bit more vivid with Genesis chapter 4, as you said, and then it gets formally enacted after the flood. But what we're dealing with here, and what I think is vital to talk about, because this is really, just in case anyone's sort of dialing in on this stuff, what we're saying here is that what's happening, if we talk about redemptive mandates and stuff like that, anything redemptive and covenant of grace, that's happening now before the flood. And that's not happening after the flood. So this is where the covenant of grace, redemption stuff is going on. So if you can find a cultural mandate year before the flood, go ahead. Then you've got yourself a real argument for why we should, as those in the covenant of grace, start being, transforming and redeeming things. But this is not where you find it, because the reason for that is this is the covenant of grace. This is pointing forward to Christ's work in the Pactum Salutis, as it's being administered in the covenant of grace. And then afterwards, and this is going back to Genesis 3:15, the beginning of the covenant of grace, and then afterwards we'll see something that, as we said earlier, is kind of connected to the broader framework as a stage, but is decidedly not the covenant of grace. It's not redemptive, it's not transformative, it's not anything like that. So
it's good.
With that in mind,
now we come to the flood.
Now, again, my goodness, I'm thankful we did bring some. When we looked at baptism, we kind of touched all this stuff, because I think I'll go mad right now trying to summarize even, because it's just so much good. Next to the recreation, decreation. Wow, awesome. It really is amazing. If you haven't looked at this, speaking to anyone out there,
Maybe
if you
just
haven't
one
looked,
sentence to
all right,
summarize it.
all right,
The
there.
flood is presented as a redemptive judgment ordeal that comes to serve as a paradigm for future judgment events.
Yeah,
The flood itself is an act of decreation, while its abatement is an act of recreation. After the flood, Noah is presented as a new or second Adam figure.
yeah. So basically, what you see as you go into this is it's not just judgment. It's not just a random that's the end, It's
Yeah,
it's the whole thing is calculated to show how it's redeeming and recreating through God's appointed means, uh, obviously in Noah and the ark. And so yeah, just a whole world of content there by itself. But then we get, let's try and stick to our particular point here, trying to bring out the significance. You get to the as Peter calls it, the world that now is,
yeah,
the after the flood, post-diluvian situation, and we see that here's where all the action happens in terms of the cultural mandate and all of that sort of thing. God renews all of that, and it's really powerful because you got Noah as a kind of new Adamic figure in every sense, receiving like almost exactly what Adam received as a cultural mandate to begin with. And so, on first reading, you could be forgiven for thinking, okay, well, it's all back on, Now here we are back to square one. It's kind of like almost a dispensational thing, that didn't work. Let's start again. There's no sense of continuity and progression. Um, but I think what we need to say here is there's absolutely progression and continuity, and we're not just reversing and starting again as if nothing happened. We're saying that there's a serious tweak that comes at this point in light of the fall and in light of the covenant of grace.
yeah,
Those two things are all important. You can't just carry on as if they didn't happen. And so when God reissues the cultural mandate, he's doing so, as he puts somewhere, I can't find the exact quote now, but he says he's doing this. It's being structured. It's being refracted, to use Klein's term. I'm not sure if he uses that term in the essay, but it's being refracted, almost like light. It's coming through a prism and changing it. And it's being refracted to suit a fallen situation. That was not the case with Adam.
yeah,
When he was told to have dominion, there's no such thing as dying. The earth is not going to own you. You're going to own the earth, as it were. When it comes to the animal kingdom, again, you have every possibility of attaining to that kind of glimpse that we saw with Noah in the ark. But now, after the flood, even with Noah's own quick drunkenness straight after he gets into his new farm, like the first thing he does with the new creation is get drunk. My goodness. So the fall is certainly still in play. And so now it's like, when God issues that cultural mandate, it's working within that paradigm.
yeah,
And so this is an all important point, because this means that, we just can't do what Adam could do, and was commissioned to do. And, Noah, even on his best day, wasn't commissioned to do what Adam was commissioned to do. So, any thoughts along those lines are already misdirected.
yeah.
Don't know if you got any
Yeah.
thoughts or comment there.
No, he does say like several significant differences that exist in the post flood world, and he actually
Yep.
numbers them. So he says, firstly, humanity's dominion over the animal kingdom is now characterized as a dominion of fear and dread.
Mm,
So
mm,
there's continuity, and because of the fall, discontinuity.
mm, mm.
Secondly, he says the provision for food in the garden consisted of all seed-bearing fruits and vegetables. Now, however, the provision for food also includes animal flesh. So
Mm-hmm.
there's continuity, there's eating and enjoying God's wonderful creation, but there's this element of death that's sewn
Yeah,
into it.
yeah,
Yeah, so he just, and then he says a final difference between the world of common grace before and after the flood is the sanction of capital punishment. And that brings us to Genesis 9,
yeah.
verse 5 and
Which
6.
again is no small thing, because you see what ends up being a big point is that capital punishment is not for anything of a sin against God. Which you would expect would be the case if we're bringing it, if this is it, if this is kind of the new creation, and Adam is now tasked to make sure to keep it clean, as it were,
Yeah,
keep it all sanctified. And if any evil comes in, he would have Adam's task of crushing the head of the serpent, essentially.
yeah,
Anything that comes into the sanctuary that profaned it would need to be killed. So basically, you would expect something like, anyone who blasphemes my name
yeah.
shall be killed. And the
Anyone who
reason for
breaks the
that,
first table of the law would
yeah.
be killed. Now
Yeah.
it's anyone who breaks the second table of the law.
And there's just a notable omission of the first table altogether. It's almost like, which on its own is just common grace. I mean, that's kind of the very definition of it, that God would not bring the due penalty that upon those that break the first table. That's being suspended until the final judgment
Yeah.
is what really common grace is. I mean, it's not saying that those things won't be dealt with. It's just saying that they're not being dealt with now, so as to create a stage. And so that really on its own, the fact that capital punishment thing is issued the way that it is, I think is just again a huge point that you spend a
Yeah.
lot of time developing to that I don't think they do spend a lot of time developing if they're trying to argue for some sort of
I
transformative
mean,
model.
I can imagine being a Jew that Moses had led out of Egypt,
Mm,
and I would be hearing the law of Moses. You know, you break the Sabbath, death penalty. You blaspheme my name, I will not. You will not be guiltless.
mm,
You worship an idol, take him outside the city, stone him.
mm,
There's this
mm,
hectic death penalty
mm,
stuff. And then you go back and you hear the story of Noah, and
mm.
it's like, oh, only for murder? And you
Totally.
would have felt that deep contrast between here I am in a theocracy, here are the laws Moses has given me, and then Noah's got something significantly different.
Yeah, and they did. It wasn't not noticed. I mean, that was their rubric for understanding how the Gentiles could live the way that they were living. I mean, you've got all these things. They didn't call it common grace, but Van Drunen brings out. He really develops this. I think it was in his, if I'm not mistaken, it's his last book mostly. Although he touches on it all throughout his writing. But in his last book, Politics and Christendom, I think it's called, hitting a blank, is it spends a whole section on this, just how they would have viewed that as Jewish believers, and it's very similar to what we call common grace. It was a kind of law that allowed for existence in some sense, for the Gentiles, them understanding themselves to have a fuller revelation of what was required. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, those things are all important. The only thing he doesn't, unless I missed it, well, you know what he does do? He touches on the rainbow, which is good, which is like the sign of everyone knows, the covenant, and the bow, which is the Hebrew word for the same thing as like a warrior's bow. And
Yeah,
so Klein really plays on that. He rips on that idea big time. He's like, well, it's like the warrior's bow is at rest. And certainly that works in terms of like God is not making war at the moment on the earth. That's coming later. Now there's a
yeah,
peaceful posture, hence the stage. But I think what he suggests is actually better. I have looked at this a little bit, can't go into it in full scale detail now, but what he suggests in terms of the way the rainbow is used, I mean, so the big one would be Revelation, where it's just it seems to me very clear that it talks about God's rulership over all of creation. Whenever the rainbow appears, you've got this idea of a kind of this is the glory of God as He rules over all of creation, and so I think what you have here actually is just a sign showing the God who owns it all, essentially. The God who controls it all is the God that's now making a covenant with creation. Therefore, the security is that, there's just nothing. It's unilateral. Nothing can break this,
yeah.
until God
I've heard a
himself will bring
third
it.
interpretation,
Yeah.
and that it's instead of the rainbow pointing at the earth, the rainbow is pointing at God. So
Yeah.
some people have taken it because they're probably wanting not wanting to see it as a common grace covenant, but rather more in line of the
Redemption.
a progression of redemption. It's
Mm.
like just as God walked between the cut pieces,
Yeah.
they point the rainbow. It's God pointing the bow at himself and
Yeah.
taking the punishment.
I mean, look, I'm fine with that insofar as it's an analogy. I suppose if you really pushed it, you'd end up with universalism at that point, which is kind of what worries me with that idea,
True, true.
So, but insofar as okay, fine, it's all saying the same thing. Like God is ultimately, we know, creating this peace
Yeah,
temporally for the purpose of the cross, which is exactly that, bringing wrath upon himself. So, I don't mind using those figures in that
yeah. But
sense.
for common grace purposes, rest or display of His glory,
A display of his glory, yeah,
they're the better scenarios.
and
Yeah,
I think what you have then is quite amazing with he what isn't given here, and this is something Klein brings up big time. What isn't given here is a reinstitution of the Sabbath, or any talk of the Sabbath. There's no sign of consummation, entering into rest at all. So this is very different to what you see in Genesis, right? Because in Genesis, it's like, here's this cultural mandate. do all these things, and then
Yeah.
the big, I mean, you just can't help, you go into Genesis chapter 2 verse 1 to 3, and it's just boom, the Sabbath glory. God is seated on his throne. This is what we're invited into. Certainly by the time we get to Hebrews, we understand that that is heaven, right? That's what he was called to emulate, to work, to enter into that. Everything God had just tasked him to do had that as its end, the Sabbath, the glorious finality, the telos of all creation.
Yeah.
And this is just to the fact that this is all repeated again and now just omitted completely. There's no talk of Sabbath at all, but instead what you have is talk of a rainbow. It's almost like what is happening here is that you could say that they're two different signs, right? The one is
Yeah.
a sign of the covenant of redemption, or at least the covenant of works, ultimately,
Yep.
that Christ will earn for us.
Do this and live, and rest is
Yes,
the reward. Yep.
and there it is, right? Sabbath means that. And then when you go rainbow, you're thinking about the same God, but really the two kingdom sign here is in place, because you've got that which is the king who rules over all of creation, and the king who promises redemption. So I
Yeah.
think that the rainbow and the sign work hand in hand. The rainbow and the Sabbath work hand in hand, but they're different. And the fact that there's
Amen.
no Sabbath and there is a rainbow is something that people have to reckon with.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's the distinctiveness of the Noahic covenant as a common grace covenant.
there we go. Yeah,
Yeah. And we have to recognize that distinctiveness. It does function differently. And that's why
totally.
we describe it as a stage and not as part of the main drama working itself out.
Yeah. And you see this contrasted again by the time you get to Mosaic covenant, because there again, you've got the Sabbath coming to the very forefront of it all, because again, common grace is being suspended,
Yep.
and now you got no rainbow. There's no rainbow in Israel, so to speak. There is Sabbath though, and
Yep.
everything there is too. Yeah.
I also like what Van Pelt said about the flood throwing the promise of Genesis 3:15 into crisis. There was
Yes.
this promise of a deliverer, of a savior who would come, and then if God's going to kill the world, then well, that promise is not going to get fulfilled.
Yeah.
But then with the establishment of common grace, it's a re-establishment of the stage so that
Mm,
character can walk out, Christ can walk onto the stage
mm,
and fulfill that promise.
brilliant.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just
Preserving.
setting it up and pushing the narrative forward.
Yeah, preserving a humanity from whom the human, the seed of the woman
Amen.
could come, preserving a humanity from whom the nation could come, from whom the
Yeah.
seed would come,
And
etc. Yeah.
preserving humanity from which a people can be saved.
Totally, totally. Which is why it's still in play,
Yeah. Amen.
Exactly right. Now, and this is where we get into the theonomy debate and everything, because like, well, um, it's all done. Redemption is accomplished. But, I mean, like if you go the theonomy direction and you go, well, let's get rid of Noah, let's get rid of all the stuff we're talking about. Let's just go gung ho back to Israel and really do it all over again. You're effectively saying you don't need that common grace to allow for a people to exist for whom the gospel can come and penetrate their darkness. You just
Yeah.
you remove that essential part of the picture even
Yeah.
after Christ.
If you set a
So
political kingdom that kills sinners, how are you going to preach to save them?
yeah, exactly.
So Christians are just, resigned to a prison ministry of getting people off death row. That's the only way we evangelize.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
in a theocracy. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, we've mentioned this before. They do say like, okay, no, because I mean this was the big squabble. This was the big squabble with Bunsen and Klein. Bunsen was like, no, I mean it's only until we get majority.
And
So
then anyone who disagrees with theocracy gets death.
including Christians, anyone, it's not just unbelievers that have to worry about it. It's the poor Baptists at that point.
Yeah.
We go back to being persecuted. So yeah, no, it's problematic. But to be fair, they're not just saying bring out the weapons and go crusader immediately.
Now, to move from the profound to the mundane, should we
Mhm.
discuss the offspring of the offspring of the serpent survives
Well, I think
and Ham's sin?
yeah. Yeah, let's do it. I mean, this is what he ends off with, and I think it's right, because one of the big things there, I think, is just to see, because as I see it, it's almost like, imagine you're running an extension cord from Genesis 3:15 all the way. You got this big flood event that kind of, right, that cuts your power,
Yeah.
and then you need a way to reconnect it again afterwards, in terms of like what's happening in Genesis 3:15. How does the story keep moving past the flood, because that's really been the end of the world and the
Yeah.
new creation, and we've just realized Noah got drunk, so that means we're still in
Yeah.
the fall. But then,
But what I wanted to get to was, what does it mean when it says Ham saw his father's nakedness?
well, I mean, what I would say the primary meaning, and I think he does point this out, is beyond what one might interpret the actual sin to be. The reason it's worded the way it's worded is to bring out the fact that this you just are shot straight back to nakedness in the garden, right? You just
Yeah,
there you were. What was Satan doing in the garden? He was there to uncover Adam's nakedness. That's what was happening. His goal was to see Adam naked, unable to screen himself from the wrath of God.
divested of his royal investiture.
Right. Exactly. So the very fact that the narrative frames it that way, whatever happened, it's almost like a moot point. What happened? The fact that he came into the tent, no less, and like this creeping serpent with that mission to uncover and see his father, ashamed in that way. Um, this is to show that he becomes the seed of the woman that was seed of the serpent, at least, that was spoken of in the garden, and
Yeah,
and that then, as I say, puts this massive like connection of power together, because then you go all the way, he becomes, it's specifically mentioned, he becomes the father of the Canaanites, and we know what happens there, and how the holy war idea transpires in Israel, and then the true Israel with Jesus, who kills the true enemies of God. So it all becomes this one big, I mean,
yeah,
without this story, you actually would have a big void. Where's Israel? Where's Canaan coming from? Why do they matter so
yeah, for
much?
sure.
Yeah,
Now, recapitulation aside,
yeah,
he does give some options for trying to understand the exact nature of his sin, and he gives four options. Voyeurism, castration, homosexual rape, paternal incest, or maternal incest, uncovering your father's nakedness, being the father's wife.
yeah.
Basically, slept with his mother. Um, you know, I guess, in my studies,
Leave it
paternal
alone.
incest had
Just leave it
always.
alone. Leave it alone.
Well, I mean, it's out there
You
now, because
you can't
we're
help. You can't help
we're,
it. You
we're in
got
the
to go
world
there.
of homosexual theology, liberation theology.
You know what you
And
remind me of right
what's
now?
that?
You remind me of like a Ken Ham guy.
Really?
Yeah, it's like you're like trying to talk about dinosaur fossils. We've
No,
just
no
been
way,
talking
is
about
really.
like the lineage and the seed of the woman. Now you want to talk
Yeah,
about
but
like,
you still have to answer. There are questions to be answered.
nah, I say
What
you
was the
just
nature
should
of the
not.
sin?
I say you missed the point.
Fine, I'll be Ken Ham. So, I guess, I always. I mean, I had someone say to me once, that it's absolutely irrelevant. God just chose to make this an issue of blessing and cursing.
Can I
Um,
just start the video right now? And if you really like it, just hit subscribe on this bell right away. No, I'm just
anyway, so Van Pelt seems to lean towards maternal incest as a
yeah,
possibility,
yeah,
which I
interesting.
thought was quite interesting. I hadn't heard that before, so I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, yeah. They're all. It is a fascinating discussion. I
Yeah,
mean,
I'd
but
heard the
but
paternal incest one, but not the maternal incest one.
yeah, I find it so frustrating, all that stuff, to be honest. I think that's half the problem for me. I'm like, if I can't get the answers, I don't even want to look, Because it's just like, I mean, you're going to come up with a half baked answer at best. So just, and look, if I write an email to someone and I don't make
That's
clear what
because
I'm,
you're only worried about your questions. I'm worried about everyone else's questions.
well, okay, but I'm arguing that the Bible is framing itself in a way that is bringing you to ask the right questions. You ask the wrong questions, you get the wrong
Yeah,
answer. I think I'm quoting Nick
amen.
Cleveley there.
Yeah,
So the idea, if I write a letter to someone or email someone, and I don't want them to focus on the trivial part of what I'm saying, I'll leave out the details. It's just how communication works. I'll bring the focus to where it should be brought. And if that person is sort of asking, probing on the exterior, the periphery, it's like either I failed to communicate that properly, or like he's missing it. One of the two is happening. So I think with these sorts of things, I mean, the Bible just doesn't give us enough information to work with to actually solve that problem.
yeah.
Now, is that just an omission? Is that just like a failure on the part of the biblical author, or is that because like it's enough to get
It's
your
not the point.
attention, but
Yeah,
it's like it's vile, that much. It's a bad sin, it's something bad happened. It's obviously really bad. It gets the curse of Ham, for crying out loud.
yeah. No,
It
it's good.
becomes the Canaanites. But the thing you're actually called to focus on is the wording that is being used, which is this nakedness theme. Like, where did that come from? Well, now your obligation as a student of the Bible is to go, all right, let's think about nakedness. How does that work? And then, of course, you got this massive deal. Even, I mean, my goodness, even Christ on the cross, receiving the curse in nakedness, and it's just, you can go all the way through to our being clothed in glory, and it just becomes a profound sort of theological code word for the theme that I think is meant to be focused on. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's actually the opposite. Like my concern is often not that. That's the trick for me. I'm
I,
like,
I
I want to know
do
what's
I
going
do
on.
wonder though whether the original audience knew what he was saying, where we don't know as much. Where
Yeah, well, it might have been
maybe the language is specific enough,
to figure it out.
and yeah,
But now, in that case, I would put it in the category of baptism for the dead, because like no doubt they knew what Paul was talking about there,
yeah,
but like we don't. So
yeah.
I
Maybe.
I'd even put it into the category of spiritual gifts, just to freak a few
I
charismatics
just
out.
like the fact that I've now got a stronger option than paternal incest.
Dude, there we go. Well, that's good. So
Well, let
um,
me read part of his conclusion, and we can end it.
let's end it.
I
That
mean,
that
let's
that
just nail
last.
the double covenant part, because I think
So you're gonna start with this covenant of common grace, because you got to start there. If you're gonna read that last bit, don't leave that out. So halfway through that last paragraph there.
Even just slightly above.
Oh,
So
okay.
he does, he contrasts Genesis 6 with Genesis 9. And with regards to Genesis 6, looking at the two covenants that we must recognize, he says, the covenant recorded in Genesis 6 was an individual, bilateral, redemptive administration of the covenant of grace fulfilled in the preservation of Noah, his family, and a remnant of the animal kingdom in the ark. So there's something very particular going on in Genesis 6.
Hmm.
The Noahic covenant recorded in Genesis 9, on the other hand, is a universal, unilateral, non-redemptive administration of the covenant of grace, restoring and securing the principle of common grace suspended during the judgment ordeal of the flood. And that's, I guess, he's circling all the way back to where he started.
Cool.
That's good.
Now, before we go, we have to just spend a little time appreciating what's going on there. We've just sort of bypassed it as if it's not a thing, but really it is a big thing. Firstly, I mean, those are a lot of books, Nick. That and that little pop culture 2H sojourner thing, it's just
Good.
it's
I just want to thank Kmart for all the paraphernalia.
that is it's special.
We do have
2H,
Kmart here in New Zealand.
except it's not the same thing. It's like the Australian Kmart, which is like
Okay.
America's Kmart's like different, apparently.
Amart.
So, man. But
Okay,
anyways,
Mart.
don't you think this backdrop looks good? And the way I'm seeing it here, it's like just books, 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 books.
Yeah, it's
Books.
good.
It's what it's all
Drowning
about.
in books. There's actually a corner there.
Yeah, I can see the corner.
Yeah.
Good. Well done. I think it's an upgrade. I was getting sick of that piano and guitar in the back, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like, dude, what am I focusing on? Are we doing theology or what are we doing?
Yeah.
It's like de-psyching me.
Now you can identify Barbank, and there's
Barbank over there, right above
Calvin's
your head.
Institutes behind there, and
I
there's
know.
like George Whitfield over here, and
Hey
there's
guys,
Romans
I can see. Is that right on the top there? That's
Burkhoff.
Warfield, right?
Oh, Warfield, yeah,
Warfield,
you got to have the token.
Have I got Warfield? There's Warfield. Oh, no, I got that. Yeah, there we go. Warfield. Yeah, we should try and
Token David Dixon, Alec Botchin, Isaiah.
Mm-hmm.
Got some Burkow over there.
So surely all of those books behind you must have made this podcast better. Surely.
Definitely.
Otherwise, what's going on? The pure osmosis effect would have hit us today, without a doubt.
Sucking in.
Whoa. Either that or it just would have drained us. Left us powerless. So anyways, I'm going to see this guy in a few days' time. And I don't know if we actually are going to manage to record live because it's just so technical. I don't even know where to start, but we'll try. We'll have a go and see how it goes. But until then, thank you for joining us. And next time we look at the Abrahamic Covenant with John Scott Redd. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
So long. Farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Good night.